the focus is on trying to use math, good epistemics to try to understand how can we allocate limited resources that we have. How can we allocate this to do the most good possible? Like satisfy certain metrics, like being emotionally salient for some people, like, oh, I don't know, helping people by donating food to them might be very emotionally salient and very impactful in that sense. But is it the most effective way of helping the most number of people? The way the resources are currently being allocated is not always optimal.
Hi everyone, in this episode I get a chance to speak to Aditya Karanam. He's part of the Effective Altruism community in India. He works on animal advocacy and he is also involved with electric sheep. In this conversation we talk about two things. The first is what is EA, Effective Altruism, what is it, how it decides which problems are worth solving, why the community looks the way it looks, and what is going on in the India chapter. Secondly, we discuss animal advocacy. Animal advocacy is something that's very close to Aditya. We discuss, what does factory farming look like in India, whether technology like lab-grown meat is that part of the solution. I personally push back through a lot of this because I am a meat eater myself, and a lot of these ideas are new to me. I hope you find this conversation useful. If you have heard about EA but don't really know what it is, or if you are interested in animal advocacy but don't know where to begin, this should be a good starting point for you. If you have any feedback on the episode, if there are things that you like or don't like, and you want to share it with me, write a comment or reach out to me. Anyways, I hope you guys find this useful. Thank you so much.
Aditya, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it. What I wanted to start off with is, for somebody who has heard, I think EA has been in a lot of the mainstream discourse, I think post OpenAI, Anthropic, that is one part, FTX is another part. A lot of people have been exposed to, what is on the sort of the impacts of AI, or people involved in sort of EA, right? Mm-hmm. So for people who are on the outside looking in, what is EA in that sense? If you could maybe paint a picture, maybe we could pick it from there, maybe.
Yeah, right. Like the name suggests, it's essentially about a community that's trying to answer the question, how can we do the most good effectively with limited amount of resources? So in some sense, it's similar to social impact communities, but here the focus is on trying to use math, good epistemics to try to understand how can we allocate limited resources that we have as humans, whether it's money, whether it's time, whether it's talent. How can we allocate this to do the most good possible, whatever that good might be? So that is what this community is centered around, and it has people working on different cause areas, whether it's animal welfare, AI safety, trying to improve global institution coordination mechanisms, pandemic preparedness, etc. So there's a variety of cause areas, and so all of these cause areas come within different prioritization based on three main prioritization metrics. One is the scale. So each of these issues affects different number of individuals. Some affects more than the others, and some affects people in the present versus people who will exist in the far future. So there is a variation, or there's a variance in the scale. So that's one. And two is the neglectedness. That's the second metric that we use, which is, okay, how many resources is the world currently allocating in making progress on these issues? For example, something like climate change or global poverty is already receiving a lot of resources, whereas something like, say, animal welfare is way neglected compared to, say, something like, I don't know, military spending going into protecting certain resources, etc. So yeah, so that's second, neglectedness, and third is tractability, which is, if we spend resources on this for a given dollar, how much progress do we make on this particular issue? Is it tractable? Is it solvable? Or irrespective of whatever resources we spend, the impact we make is only marginal and doesn't account for much. So that's the third metric that we use, which is tractability. So based on these three metrics, we as a community try to understand which of these issues is the most pressing and how do we allocate resources.
And the motivation for this, I mean, in a sense that, is it because a lot of money, I mean, I don't know about India, but I think in the US at least, a lot of money, people do, I think my understanding would be, they do give a lot to charity. There are organizations that give a lot to charity. Is the motivation that, at least pre-EA, there are two things, right? Is the motivation that pre-EA, the money that was being spent was not spent in the quote unquote right way? Or is it just, you also mentioned the causes as well, right? Like you have different priorities of like what cause to take up. Is it that pre-EA, the causes that money was being allocated to, EA kind of does not really agree with that's the best kind of use of that money, or the dollar spent could be better utilized. Is it the cause? Is it the way that things were being done earlier? What's the motivation there?
I think, yes, the community did notice, people did notice that the way the resources are currently being allocated is not always optimal. There are better ways of allocating resources such that we could affect more number of people positively. And also sometimes the interventions chosen were not as effective, they were not as evidence-based, while they might like satisfy certain metrics like being emotionally salient for some people, like, oh, I don't know, helping people by donating food to them might be very emotionally salient and very impactful in that sense. But is it the most effective way of helping the most number of people? Say something like donating to charities like Against Malaria Foundation, which works on distributing insecticide-treated bed nets. It doesn't come on the top of one's emotional salience list, but it does, like, based on the math, it is very cost effective in terms of helping a large number of people. So again, so that's one. And yeah, it is noticing that the way the resources were being distributed was not optimal.
So on the emotional disconnect part, I just wanted to know, like, I mean, in the sense that, does it discourage certain people? Because when you're doing charity, the person who does charity also wants to kind of feel good, and that's like the emotional component of doing charity, and that's why people give money to beggars on the street, because they see the immediate outcome of that smile on the person's face, or they just feel like they've made an impact. So that disconnect, but if the organization itself or the community itself prouds itself by saying that we take a very emotionally disconnected approach of doing charity, so does that attract a certain kind of people, and does that discourage maybe the mainstream group of people who might really want emotions involved in charity, right? So can you speak to that maybe?
Yeah, thanks. So there are some common misconceptions about EA, and one of which is that, oh, the people who are involved in the community don't necessarily respect the emotions that come out of trying to do good in the world, which might not necessarily, quote unquote, be the most effective way of doing things. But what the community is doing is it is recognizing that there is a need to contribute among people in the world, whoever does philanthropy in any scale. But they are also recognizing the fact that, yes, the people who do contribute want to see whatever resources that they are expending on trying to improve the world are actually having an impact, and are having an impact in ways that matter, and are doing the best they can with the limited amount of resources that they are expending on it. So if, for example, someone wants to address the issue of homelessness by donating to beggars or, poverty, etc., so what is the best way of trying to address this issue? Is it by donating to the person you see on the street? Perhaps that is not used in the best possible way, or it's not reaching the people who most need it. So how do we go about addressing this issue? So that would need like a more bird's eye view of the problem, and trying to look at, okay, what's happening in this space? What are the things that have already been done and have been found to be not very effective at addressing the issue of begging and homelessness and poverty? And so as you climb the ladder of trying to look at, okay, what is working and what isn't working and what is neglected, have all the options been tried or have they not been tried? So these are the kinds of questions that push us towards this introspection and a more scientific way of thinking of addressing a particular issue, which is what EA tries to bring into the picture. Most people who are involved in social impact of philanthropy don't necessarily put that in the center. Perhaps they do, but EA as a community is trying to bring together these actors, these people who think about issues in a more scientific way and in a more evidence-based way to try to solve the issues of the world. And again, there's a lot of issues that the world has, and how do you prioritize among them? So that brings me back to the earlier point that I mentioned on the 3 metrics, which is scale, neglectedness, and tractability. And based on this, we try to address these questions. And what kind of crowd that brings in is, again, another question, which I also wanted to briefly touch upon. So again, when people try to communicate about EA, EA community is not like a homogeneous structure of people communicating the same message. There's a diversity of opinions, diversity of personal views that people within the community hold. People might be utilitarians, deontologists, virtue ethicists. They might have religious views like Jews, Christians, etc. So I have noticed within the community itself, there's like a lot of these subgroups, and within each of these subgroups, there's like variance in the views that they hold, and they try to prioritize within that kind of framework, try to use the values that their particular subcommunity considers central to guide their own decision making. So I think the central component is yes, wanting to do good in the world and the emotional appeal that brings. And the second is also trying to understand how can we do the most good. And yeah, so I would be hard pressed to paint a stereotype of what an EA would look like, even though there's memes about it out there. But I think, yeah, there are people from different countries, different backgrounds, who are interested in different cause areas, hold different personal views. So, yeah.
Talking about, talking about stereotypes. So, what do you think about why do you think, at least in my opinion, right? If I was to look at the EA crowd, why, let me know if you, this may be a digression, plus let me know if you agree or disagree with this, is that most of the EA crowd somehow tends to stem from SF. Like one is on the SF is like broad here, but at least mostly they seem to be from the tech sector. I think most of the donors are also, if I'm not wrong, from the tech sector. Even even in Bangalore, I feel most of them do work in IT. Is that like a what do you make of that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And so like addressing different sub questions that you had. One is most of the crowd from SF? I don't think so. Yes, there is a sizable EA community in SF in Bay Area where I think the features of the community tend to attract or so when the EA community started, it was mostly around the Oxford circles. That's where like the founding members of the EA community were. It was a group of individuals in the Oxford education community that came together and started the community. And then there was a lot of conversations about AI safety, and that found a lot of resonance within the SF Bay Area tech community. So also the other adjacent field of like improving epistemics, say like the Astral Codex community or the rationality community, was also very interested in questions about how to improve epistemics. And so the conversations that were very prevalent in EA had a strong overlap with the tech community and the improving epistemics community, which tended to have certain features. And I think there was like a sort of like a feedback loop that led to more and more people from those communities having more exposure to EA ideas, which led to more of them coming in. I do think over the years, so I've been following the EA community over the past 6 to 7 years, and I've seen there being increase in diversity. But that said, again, it's an interesting question to ask and perhaps a good anthropological or like a social science question to explore, which is why is it that these ideas attract certain crowds, which tend to be mostly male, tech, etc.
No, mostly male at least is also fine, because I think most groups in general, I don't know, is mostly male itself. But that's fine. But at least there seems to, I don't know if there is some relation between like being a software engineer or being in IT or being in science in general, or or working in scientific fields in general. You're kind of attracted to these kind of ideas. But anyways, maybe one. Not deeper, but one more digression could be, what do you make of, if I propose to you, what do you make of this proposition if I was to say, Bill Gates as the first EA, right? If I can flesh this out a little bit, I mean, so Bill Gates, I think, started as Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in, I think, 94, 95, if I'm not wrong, which is at least 15 years before the EA movement, if I'm not wrong. And when he went on to start doing charity, he I think, he did it very differently, if I'm not wrong. Like, a lot of the causes that he kind of went after, like, malaria vaccine, malaria, your nets and your polio vaccine, your condoms, distribution of condoms, etc. So I think he went about doing things very differently and very scientifically as well. Is it a stretch to call him like the first, I don't know, pre-EA, first EA, something like that? Or has he, even though he's not been a part of the community, has he philosophically been aligned there?
Yeah, so I want to clarify here that this is my opinion as someone who resonates with some ideas of the EA community, and I don't think I'm a spokesperson for the EA community. So please take all my opinions with that understanding. I don't think like for someone to be an EA, they need to be like have an association directly with the EA community. So there have been a lot of conversations about what EA intervention has happened before EA as a community existed. One popular example is, I think this was someone called Petrov. I forgot his first name. So there during the Cold War, there was this malfunction in a radar system which detected that there's a lot of these missiles that are coming in from, I think, the US that are trying to attack Russia. And the response the book response to that was to, trigger the nuclear warheads in the submarines to go to the US. But this person decided to not do it because even though there was like this radar showing, it turned out that it was like some other objects in the sky that caused the radar to show these things. But even though there was evidence, he chose not to do it given the potential negative impact that such an action would have. And so he took that unilateral decision to not do that. So there are examples of that being an EA act as well. And of course, if you go back into the history and if you look at different social reformers and leaders, perhaps some of the ways in which they acted on the issues they acted could also be quoted as a form of doing good that was in its time a very effective way of doing good, which till date probably also affects people positively, like writing constitutions that talk about respecting individual rights and for privacy, etc., abolition of slavery and the people who participated in it. So I don't think Bill Gates was the first person, but perhaps a lot of acts that he has sponsored or he has funded, like interventions, like say condom distribution, etc. I don't have the math with me on how effective that is versus other interventions that the EA community is funding right now. But sure, they were guided by evidence. They were guided by trying to do the most good with the resources he has. But was there cause neutrality, was he already fixated on, I only want to focus on global poverty, or did he put all the causes neutrally and focused on the issue that was affecting the most sentient beings is again a question to dive deeper into. I won't make any comments on that because I haven't explored this, but yeah, that was just to share my thoughts.
That's fair. For someone maybe who is interested in the ideas of EA and wants to explore, what can they expect in the sense that obviously there are many problems in the world in present, but also in the future. But there is only so much mind space and there's only so much that people can even talk about or people can write about. So what are the issues that people can expect who are maybe getting into EA today that are like the major topic of discussion, or some things that are very high on the prioritization scale? If you can talk about that maybe.
Yeah, that's a good question. So one thing that is salient and a heated topic of discussion in the community these days is the elephant in the room, which is how the transformations in AI are going to affect the society. The timelines have been becoming shorter. A lot of the experts in the community, forecasters, have now been predicting that the initially predicted timelines, longer timelines, are no longer the curves have been decreasing, and now it's estimated that approximately between 10 to 30 years, one could see AGI come up based on the current indicators and the impacts that would have on the society, whether it's in the form of power concentration, whether it's in the forms of catastrophic risks that could be enabled through use of AI, like pandemics, biosecurity risks, and other such issues, whether it's military warfare, etc., or AI being misaligned and trying to concentrate power for itself. So a lot of these questions are being discussed in the community, and that's also become like one of the priority issues. And of course, AI in itself is not like an independent issue. It has effects on all the other cause areas as well, whether it's for global poverty, climate change, animal welfare, etc. So how would AI intersect with all these other cause areas is also another issue that's been explored. For example, I work with an organization called Electric Sheep, as well as Animal Ethics. So both these organizations, we are exploring the intersection of AI and animal protection. And so there's newer organizations coming up there. And of course, as AI becomes more and more intelligent, does it gain autonomy? Does it gain agency, sentience? So the issue of digital sentience is also gaining prominence. Of course, it's still niche, but it is also starting to gain more prominence, and a lot of popular thought leaders are starting to take this topic more seriously. So yeah, these are just some of the issues. And like as the rate of progress in AI is increasing, the risk of bioterrorism and other such biohazards is also increasing. And so there's also a lot more discussion happening on, okay, what can we do given this thing? Like, for example, the recent Anthropic model.
Mythos
Mythos
was
was like, it was claimed that it could enable serious risks, like the initial leaks at least talked about that. So yeah, given all these transformations happening in the society today, or the gradual disempowerment issue as well, what can we do as a
Sorry,
community?
what is the gradual disempowerment issue?
Oh, like as more and more people give AI more control of the social processes, then humans would gradually be disempowered, whether it's through economy or whether it's through AI taking over jobs, etc. So this issue also worries people a lot, which is it will take away that agency and autonomy, and it would have far binding effects, whether it's in terms of collective human psychology, how we relate to each other, etc. So yeah, how do we as a society start preparing for this potential futures that might emerge? So that's also a question that's being explored. Again, I can't list on all the topics that are happening, all the sub conversations that are happening, but these were some of that I was aware of.
But if somebody wants to know, like, many people might be interested in AI, etc. But there might be other topics that might interest, I don't know, different kind of people. So where should somebody probably go to? Are there any resources that you can probably shed light on, where people can go and explore all the things, I don't know, like all the problems open problems that might be there, or some of the issues on priority, which for somebody else, some person might say nuclear risk is more important than, they might come to that conclusion, right? So where can they go and evaluate all these problems, or if you can?
Great question. So yeah, I totally agree. If you look at some of the organizations or institutes within EA that do career advice, so one of their advice for people wanting to enter into the space and maybe dedicate their career into working on one of these top areas is to also account for their own personal fit, their own counterfactual impact, which is, okay, so these are the top areas, but what is your personal fit? What are the areas among this that you feel the best position to tackle? And compared to the next best person, what do you think your marginal impact entering into this space to contribute might be? So there are these variety of factors that are involved in trying to work on the space. But anyway, in terms of the resources or the best pathway to exploring the community and the conversations that are happening, I would recommend there is the virtual fellowship, the Effective Altruism Fellowship that happens every few months, every 3 months, I think, where you are clubbed together with other people who are also interested in entering into the space. So there's like a 6-week fellowship, I think, 6 to 8 week fellowship, where you read about different cause areas. So there's readings, and you come together and you chat with other peers in your cohort and try to develop your ideas about the topics in the space. So that would be one, which is definitely to do there's an intro fellowship and there's an in-depth fellowship. And if you're also interested in exploring, say, existential risks in more detail, so there's this Precipice reading group. Precipice is this book written by this author, Toby Odd, who's one of also the very prominent members in Effective Altruism community, where he talks about the different catastrophic risks that could affect human civilization moving forward, what are the probabilities of those and what we can do about it. So if one is interested in exploring that, they could participate in those reading groups. So the first step I would say is to, if possible, if they have the time and the bandwidth available, to participate in these fellowships. And I think that would also enable them to reach out to the broader community, form connections. So that's one. And two is 80,000 Hours, the website. It has great career advice for people interested in exploring careers within these top pressing areas. If they are interested in understanding the different considerations involved, okay, how do I choose a career? What are the first steps? What are the skills that I require, etc. So I would highly recommend 80,000 Hours. It has a great career guide. And if you're also interested in understanding what have been the latest opinions about what's happening in the world by, let's say, people involved in the EA community or experts outside the EA community, then I will also recommend the 80,000 Hours podcast. They interview experts, and I think it's great. I'm a regular listener. So that's three. So yeah, the first was a fellowship, second is the 80,000 Hours, and three is the podcast. And four, if you don't feel comfortable in changing your career trajectory at this point, but you still want to contribute, maybe through donations, maybe you would be more comfortable. You're already working in a well-paid job and you would be more comfortable with paying money to some of these charities, then you could take a look at Getting What We Can. So there's a lot of prominent people who've taken the 10% pledge, where they pledge to donate 10% of their annual income to charities of their choice, but that is informed by a group of people trying to think about, okay, if you're interested in this particular cause area, supporting this cause area, what are the organizations doing evidence-based effective work based on the metrics that I shared earlier. So yeah, that would be getting what we can. So these would be the major four. But again, if you're interested in broadly looking at what's happening in the community, then EA Forum is a website, Effective Altruism Forum. So if you just Google it, you can see the major conversations happening.
Just on the career side, right? Like, I mean, is there any advice that people who are just, I don't know, entering the workforce, is there a framework for thinking about choosing careers? Like, I think you mentioned, I don't know, 80,000 hours, etc. Do you want to flesh that out a little bit? Like, how can people think about that?
Yeah. Again, I can give like a brief summary of what I remember, but if you're interested in trying to get a detailed overview of this, I would recommend the career guide on 80,000 Hours website. But briefly, so there's different considerations that they present, or like frameworks through which the individual can think about their career choices within these particular cause areas. So one is the impact potential, which is, okay, if you decide to work on this, how much impact would you have? Say, for example, working on, I don't know, food giveaways in a local region versus like working on nuclear warfare, how to reduce the risks of nuclear war. So of course, the impact potential is one metric. Then the second is, I already mentioned, this counterfactual impact. How well positioned are you? What is your marginal impact compared to the next best person who would take that particular role, if not freely? So that's two. Free is career capital. So if you perhaps wanted to work on a given role, you would directly get that role. You need to develop adjacent skills for you to be well positioned to take on that role. So how do you go about that? So you build the necessary connections, necessary skills, you join the right communities, get access to the relevant information, all of this. So these are just some elements within the career capital paper. So once you develop all of this, that makes you more eligible to pursue the roles that are needed for further progress in a given career trajectory. And there's other such things also talked about. Again, not all of them are on top of my mind right now, but again, these advices are also changing as the ecosystem is changing, as the landscape is changing. So, for example, given the transformations in AI, so AI safety has been a priority for 80,000 hours, and it thinks that the top 2 to 5% people, like people who are working on policy, people who are working on governing institutions, compute governance, and things like that, or who are extremely skilled in, like, say, technical alignment work, evals, that is more valuable at this stage, given the stage of the society right now. So that's something that they've been focusing on more recently. They've also been helping people think about, oh, given AI taking over a lot of tasks in your daily life, how should you think about your career such that AI doesn't take away your job? So that's one of the blog posts that they wrote recently. Again, it's very hard for me to summarize all the advice in a given time. But again, these are just some of the metrics that one could use to think about, oh, how should this guide my career choices? So the impact, what's my counterfactual impact? How do I develop the career capital to progress on this particular career path? And how do I find the right communities to, get access to the right opportunities here? So there's a very interesting framework in place they used to suggest.
If you could look back maybe over the last decade, what do you think has been EA's impact on the world?
Great question. In the past 6 to 7 years that I've been working with EA, so there's many organizations in many of these cause areas, and so the achievements that they've unlocked are different in different cause areas. It would be hard to say, okay, this is what EA has done which has affected the world the most, because again, a lot of these issues are ongoing. For example, if you look at global health and poverty, one of the interventions that's been talked about a lot is distributing insecticide-treated malaria parents. So the lives that it has saved, all the donations that have gone in, and the lives that have been saved could, again, be an achievement in itself. Or Give Directly is another charity that's recommended within the global health and poverty space, which is where they do cash transfers to people in the poorest regions of the world. So from the richest regions of the world to the poorest regions of the world, a direct cash transfer where the people who receive these cash transfers have the autonomy to choose how they decide to spend their own money. And there have been randomized controlled trials done which shows that this improves the qualities of qualities is like the quality adjusted life years, which is a metric that they use to understand the quality of lives of these people. There was also DADIs, which is disability adjusted life years. Again, these are a lot of jargon. Basically, is this intervention improving the quality of life, accounting for the confounding effects? So randomized controlled trials is considered as the gold standard of evidence. So based on this, has this been improving? And so there have been some rigorous calculations done. For example, Bell is one of these charity evaluators that does this work. So yeah, like that's one. A lot of people who are currently who were at some point involved with EA have gone on to start some frontier AI companies, for example, Anthropic. So a lot of people who currently who were involved in setting off Anthropic and were at some point influenced by EA community, whether through the values, the principles, or the conversations happening in the community. So you could say perhaps, given that, let's say, whether it's OpenAI or Anthropic, they were in some sense influenced by the EA community. Was it net positive or net negative is a conversation to be had, which I don't have strong opinions on. But yeah, so that could be another thing. Yeah, so within each of these cause areas, I could, talk about. But again, so there's EA as a principle, and then there's EA as a community. So I think the question that you were asking me was about, has someone in EA's community done something substantial or significant? But I think the principle in itself is sufficient to guide people to think about whatever their philanthropy is in a more critical lens and try to maximize the impact of it. So yeah, that's how I would.
For someone who might be, who's convinced at this point that, this is something that they really align with, and now they want to know what next. I mean, what do I do next? Like, do I go to I don't know, Matteo Cafe in Bangalore? Like, what steps can they take to find maybe I don't know, local folks who are into EA, or like what can they do?
Yeah, important question again. So might be useful to share an anecdote of how I got involved in the community, which might perhaps provide some data points for someone who's in a similar space. So I was involved in animal advocacy before. It's been for approximately 10 years since I've been involved. So initially I was involved, but I was thinking about this question. Okay, going onto the streets and doing outreach, is that the most effective way I could bring about a change in the world for animals? And this was a question that kept bugging me. And then I was working as product manager in Lithuania. And I felt that, okay, there are some animal charities in India, but I don't necessarily see them thinking about their work through effectiveness lens. And also the people who work there don't necessarily feel passionately aligned to this. So while I feel passionate about it, what can I do? Is donating the best option for me? Is working there the best option for me? So I noticed that given the lack of value aligned people in the space, I felt counterfactually I could add a lot of impact to working on this issue. Now, when I started working on animal welfare, so there's different areas within it, like helping dogs, helping animals that are used for rights, helping animals in services, factory farmed animals who are exploited by the billions, which you had a podcast about recently. There's wild animals. So there's quintillions of wild animals that exist out there in the wild. So purely looking at it from a scale perspective, should I focus on helping dogs, or should I focus on helping, say, wild animals, which includes arthropods and the smaller animals which exist in large animals? So it seems like wild animals is the bigger question. And then what is more neglected? So there are more people, say, for example, helping cows through goshalas, or dogs. There's a lot of dog organizations, or conservation receives a lot of funding already. But is somebody working on wild animal welfare, wild animal suffering? I noticed there's just 3 organizations and approximately 50 people interested in this issue. Again, I don't have like stats, but roughly. And so that was the second thing. And tractability, what can I personally do about it? I come from a computer science background. I didn't have any credibility in this space. And so that involved me trying to talk to the people working on this issue, trying to understand what is missing, what I can add. So there were hardly any people working in the South Asia on this issue. So I realized if I gain more information, if I gain more, let's say, academic credibility that would work in my favor in doing advocacy on this work. So I did my animal law at Nalsar, and now I'm doing my PhD in animal ethics. So this is after I did computer science engineering. So that is helping me do advocacy, and I realized my personal strengths are advocacy, doing, talking to people, and trying to change their opinions. So that is what I work on with animal ethics. I focus on, doing advocacy for neglected groups of animals. Again, this was just an anecdote of how I got in, but another important thing is if you're interested in understanding EA as a whole, I would highly recommend you join the local groups. So right now, EA has chapters across the world. So you can go to Effective Altruism in Tiger City, and you will notice that there are chapters across the world, and you can contact the person contact there. So I think that'd be the first step in trying to understand, oh, is there a local group, and trying to share your personal interests and see if others have advice or resources that they could provide you. So that's one. And the second I already mentioned is joining the in-depth fellowship, the intro fellowship, the intro EA fellowship, to again develop your ideas in the space. So these would be like two easy steps, like forming connections locally and also trying to gain more information about EA as a concept. And then again, I mentioned the other resources earlier already. So I think these three would be like some basic ideas.
Like a starter kit.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Could you give us a sense of like what is the India EA community like? Like, I mean, I think a lot of the press, at least, is mostly spoken about either, even you started with, the Oxford community is known, and then SF is also, there's a lot of talk about on the EA community in SF on Twitter as well. But India, not so much. What can people expect in the Indian community? What is it like? Is it fun? Is it what can they expect? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Good question again. I think so there's a lot of very good charities in India that are charities and individuals in India that are being inspired through, like, say, EA principles that are doing great work. There has been an attempt to kind of create a cohesion of the community within India. And so there is something called the EA India group, or the Indian Network for Impact group as well. So if people are interested, they can attend also. This is also touching on the previous question on what someone can do. There's been conferences happening in India on effective altruism, which is called as EAGX India, since the past 4 years. It happened in Jaipur, then it happened in Bangalore, and then it happened in Delhi. And yeah, so this year is about to happen again in Delhi. So if folks are interested in networking with the broader EA community in India, people who are new also can join and learn about what's happening in the space. So it's a great opportunity to connect with people, to learn about different cause areas, and also make some good with contacts of people who are interested in working on things that you may be interested in. So you can just Google search for Effective Altruism India Conference, and then, or EAGX India, and then you can register for it. The applications will open in a few months. That's one. And I don't think the PA India community is as huge as some other global PA hubs. It's still growing, but there's still a sizable community. I think 100 to 200 people. Not all of them are actively working on EA, but yeah.
Sorry, what do you mean there are only 100 to 200? What do you mean?
So it's interesting, right? Who would you count as part of the community?
Yeah.
It's like there are people who are aware of the idea. There are people who are applying the idea within the work they're doing. There are people who are donating to charities that are doing effective work. There are people who have dedicated their careers to some of these cause areas based on the readings they've done with the BA community, etc. So it's hard to put a number, but if we use the number of people on WhatsApp, the EA India WhatsApp proxy,
Yeah.
there's approximately close to 150 to 200 people in the community. But then there's people who are not on WhatsApp. People who are signed up to the newsletter. There's people who attend the conferences. Last year, I think approximately 250 to 300 people attended the conference. So it's hard to give like a numerical estimate of how many people are in the community, but there's a sizable chunk, and it's a dynamic community. There's been some community building initiatives locally within, say, some universities, like say IIT Mumbai and IIT Madras. It's not as active, but it keeps coming and going in phases. Also in some cities like in EA Bangalore, there's a dynamic EA community. I used to do some mild community building in Hyderabad, and yeah.
Any reasons or any thoughts on why the number is so low? Like, I mean, is the reading difficult for people to do, or are the interests not that aligned on the mainstream side? Any thoughts on that at all, or you don't think that the crowd is low at all? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, so there's two subcomponents of this question, right? One is the topic inherently less interesting, or two, is there enough work being done in an effective way to get this word out to people who are the intended audience, such that they can engage with the community in meaningful ways. So I think these are two different questions. The first is the topic less interesting? I don't think that's necessarily the case. If it's communicated in ways that is accessible, yes. Like, for example, in Hindi, it would be Prabhavshali Paropkarta, which is like Prabhavshali being effective, altruism being Paropkarta. So are we reaching out to the regional audience? For example, there's a lot of philanthropy that happens for religious reasons in India. Is there any way in which we can attract some of that to some of these effective, like effective interventions from an ELX? But to reach to that audience, you need to communicate in the language that they would understand its importance. So again, has that been tackled meaningfully? I don't think yet. So there's a lot of work that can happen there. And in terms of community building, so to my understanding, some of the activities that happens with community building are like meetups, people coming together chatting, like speaker talks, like inviting experts and having that. There's some recent mentorship happening and a conference is being organized. Again, can all of these activities be bettered to have better results, to have better people attracted, a more number of people attracted? So that's again our conversation. So again, I'm not giving conclusive answers on why it's so low, but I think both of these have potential to be better for that to be.
Will more EA folks doing TikTok reels, will that help?
Yeah, that's a good question and an intervention that needs to be tested. I don't think anyone has made any reels to attract Gen Z on TikTok, Instagram, etc. So yeah, seems like there's some low-hanging fruit there. But again, the reels on TikTok or Instagram compromise fidelity for getting more views. So I also think it's important to have it's the cohesion of the message transmitted when you do these kind of things, and that might be compromised for where you might trade off on that if you just focus on making things as active or active that more attractive for your audience. So I think there is something interesting there, but I don't have like the best way of going about it.
That's fair. That's fair. So if I can switch gears a little bit, so we spoke about EA for a bit. My understanding is that the issues that you are most interested in is in the animal advocacy part of the EA. Why? Again, you also spoke about multiple AI issues and poverty issues or various different kind of issues. So why do you think on the prioritization scale, why for you personally does animal advocacy trump everything else, and why are you kind of allocating your precious time in working in that sphere? If you can maybe flesh that.
Sure. So I think for me, connecting the dots of why the interests of animals matter and why this issue deserves a lot more resources to combat all the exploitation and suffering that happens for non-human animals started like back when I was still trying to understand how do people set their moral circle boundaries, which is when I say moral circle, what does it mean? Whom do I extend moral consideration to? What does moral consideration mean? It basically means when do I take into account how my actions or attitudes impact another individual. So throughout history, the moral circle, social moral circle has been growing. Like say, for example, racism impacted the moral circle of people. Classism impacted that as well. Let's say homophobia, for example, causes people to treat, people with certain like sexualities differently, etc. So moral circle as an abstract concept where people include individuals from different groups and give them moral consideration. They care about how their actions or attitudes affect certain groups of individuals, and they do think that their interests should be respected and their well-being should be improved. So non-human animals, the reason I say non-human animals is because humans are also biologically animals, whereas society tries to put this this concept into our head that humans are somehow different qualitatively than other animals. So yeah, so non-human.
If I can jump in there, I'm just trying to understand on the advocacy side, because of the analogies you gave. You spoke about homophobia, racism, classism. So there, it was the fight for a particular group of people who wanted to be treated equally as the rest of the population. On the animal advocacy side, is that also the fight that animals should be treated as equally as human beings? Is that fair, or?
So there is this concept called as equal consideration of equal interests, which basically means that interests that hold equal weight should be given equal consideration. So if two individuals have an equal interest in something, like say in not suffering and dying, then both their interests should be treated equally. If for some reason, for unjustified reasons, we decided to give person A's interest more weight than persons B, even though both of them have equal weight, then that would be discrimination. And for example, in the case of racism, let's say if you decided to give the interests of a particular race more weightage than the interests of race B, even though both of them have equal weight. So that could be unjustified arbitrary discrimination. So that's basically
But there again, but the common factor there is both of them are kind of humans there. I mean, so this is obviously, I mean, so that's where you're like, obviously they should be treated equally.
Yeah.
But and that's why I think many people can take that leap, can take that leap from, even though it took us some time to take that leap, but we did take that leap from, just because they're a different color doesn't mean that we should treat them differently, or kill them, or do as what we like to them, something like that, But on the animal side, again, I'm a meat eater, so even I've not been able to take that leap, as discussed with Parsuram as well. Is that, again, classic example is factory farming. There's a lot of it happening. I'm aware of it. I've watched documentaries on it, but for some reason, I am still not able to take that leap from that suffering that is happening, and I know of it, but me taking that decision to quit eating meat.
Yeah, again, that's a good point. So you said that in the case of like these two races, they were humans, whereas with the case of animals,
You're treating them kind of differently, I feel. Yeah, not able to take that leap.
So now the question at point is, what is it that justifies this differential treatment of non-human animals? Is there any merit to treating them in ways where we currently treat them, putting them into cages for their entire lives, torturing and killing them, whether it's for meat or for clothing or for entertainment, etc. Sometimes even if we don't kill them, we still exploit them throughout their lives. Let's say, for example, with cows used for dairy, where while they're not initially killed, they are exploited, like females of that bovines are exploited for their nandrini glands, where the milk that they produce for the young is taken away. Anyway, so I talked about moral circle, increasing moral circle, which is, as we gain more information, as there is more moral progress in the society, we start considering more and more groups of individuals. And next, I talked about equal consideration of equal interests, which is two individuals, if they have equal interests, we should also, treat their interests equally, should give consideration to their interests. So that's the point too. And now, do animals have interests? So we know that because animals, there's enough evidence now to say that animals are sentient. What does it mean when I say sentient? Which is that animals do have interests. They do have the capacity to have positive and negative experiences. So for example, if I get tasty food, I'm very happy. When I'm hungry, if I am going through some disease, I'm suffering. So I am sentient. And we now do have evidence, both in terms of physiology and behavioral, that non-human animals are sentient, which is they do have the capacity to have pleasure and suffering. For a lot of people, this is intuitive because, you see a dog on the street or like a monkey or something, that they are happy at some stimuli and, suffering with other stimuli. But you would be surprised that scientific community is still very regressive in ways. They are very hesitant or resistant in extending moral consideration to animals. And they're also subject to prejudices, like whether it was for racism, sexism, speciesism, which is this case, where we refuse to give moral consideration to non-human animals. Again, even among the groups of animals, certain species are given more consideration than other species, which is called a speciesism, which is like, say, even within wild animals, some charismatic species like, say, tiger, elephant, panda are given a lot of limelight and spotlight. If someone kills a rhinoceros, oh, it's national news. Whereas, like, let's say a wild boar, a deer, a rabbit, a crow, these animals are treated as expendable.
Rat.
Or they kill them. They're quoted as vermin, which is like basically like a very prejudiced term to say that they're killable. Their interests don't matter. So yeah, that's one. Or let's say with animals that are closer to us, like say like a dog or a cat, is treated as a companion animal and given a lot of affection. Whereas a hen, a pig, a fish, like for example, pigs are also very emotional creatures. There is evidence that they have higher IQ than, like, let's say a 3-year-old child or something. So there's studies. But again, intelligence is not the question here, but they do have experiences to go through, positive and negative experiences. But for some reason, humans think that their suffering and pleasure counts for less than other humans. Like, why is that? Why is that? So when I ask this question to people, they say, oh no, like we are more intelligent. Okay, animals are not intelligent. Or so basically the idea is anthropocentrism. This prejudice is called as anthropocentrism, which is the view that the interests of humans counts for much more than equally or even more stronger interests of non-human animals. Let's say a trivial pleasure of like 5 minutes of eating chicken is more important than, like, humans consider that more important than the lifelong suffering of that hen that was kept in a battery cage where they have less than A4 size worth of space to move around. And right from there, when they're born, they're exploited until 45 days and then they're killed. So this 5 minutes of pleasure, they think, is more important than the extreme suffering that this particular individual hen goes through. So why is it? So they say, to defend anthropocentrism, they say, okay, we are more intelligent, or B, they say, oh, we have special relationship with other humans. We are part of the same community. So I will care about the suffering of humans, but I don't have any special relationship with animals. So I will not care about their suffering or pleasure. So, and the third common argument that I hear is also that, humans are more powerful. So this is just the argument from might. Just because we are more powerful, we can do whatever we want with them. They don't have voice, they cannot fight for themselves. I can do whatever I want and no one is questioning me. So that justifies me exploiting them and kill.
Sorry, can I? On the second point, is that I'm slightly sympathetic to that. I mean, on the second point of that we do not have like we have a special relationship with, we have a relationship with fellow human beings, but not particularly. I don't know if we have a relationship towards. I'm not saying that I'll take the leap of now we need to kill them, but but does that make sense at all? You think that we do have a relationship with animals?
So I do understand where this intuitive response to it is coming from, but I also want to highlight that this issue of meat eating and speciesism and moral consideration to animals has been studied by a lot of philosophers and ethicists, and a lot of these arguments that are very commonly put have been debunked, or like based on after critical reflection, these points seem redundant. They don't stand up to scrutiny. One such argument given against anthropocentrism is the argument from species overlap, which is that there are many humans or many groups of humans who are also not intelligent, like let's say cognitively challenged people or babies. There are many groups of peoples we don't share a special relationship. For example, there are orphans, or there are people, say, in other parts of the world who are right now suffering due to war. You don't have like a direct special relationship with them. There are groups of people who are not as powerful as you are. Say, for example, babies or people who are from the weaker sections of human society. But we would never use similar reasons to justify exploiting and harming them the way we harm animals currently. We would not consider it justifiable to put a baby in a battery cage and treat them the way we're currently treating hens. So I put them in gestation crates where mother pigs source are put inside these gestation crates where they can't turn around for their entire lives, and they are forced to breed and give birth. So anyway, so there's other such arguments. So there's the argument from relevance, there's the argument from impartiality. So I can go on and on, but perhaps for this podcast, I would mention these arguments and people can go and read about them. The organization I work with, Animal Ethics, has a website where people can read about these different topics in an accessible way. So if you're interested, you can check out Animal Ethics website as well. So this is a very important question, and even though there has been so much discussion and progress in this topic, most people in the world are not aware of this. They still resort to the same arguments that somehow seem subject to the biases that you would say or fallacies that you would say.
If I can take a step back here.
Yeah.
So what in your day to day, I'm assuming you talk to a lot of people about this, and because this cause is so dear to you, I mean, because this cause is so dear to you, I'm assuming you talk to a lot of people about this. My assumption would be that people, my assumption would be that people would be. What I'm curious to know is, do people actually give you like a lot of these intellectual reasons when you talk to them about eating meat? My assumption would be that, like, even when I was discussing this with Personam and some other friends who friends of mine who are vegan, I'm generally mea culpa here. I just say, obviously I'm wrong here, but I'm just not able to take the leap. I'm just trying to understand, like, do people actually kind of justify this in general, or is it mostly that we know, we know it's hard, but it's difficult for us to quit meat? That kind of, it's not an argument at all, but you know where I'm coming from, right? Like something like that.
Yeah. That's a great question. And okay, so there is one which is accepting the issue as important, which is acknowledging that, okay, what's happening to animals is immoral and unjust and needs to change. And the second is, okay, once you acknowledge it, do you actually, stop participating in it? So these are two different questions. And for the first one, yes, when I engage with people on this issue, a lot of these reasons that I mentioned, and there are also other reasons. For example, if you talk about exploitation in a specific domain, let's say not eating meat, there's common questions that come up about, okay, will I get all my nutrition required for having a healthy life if I give up on, participating in the exploitation of animals for food? Sometimes if it's for clothing, like let's say for wool. So there's some misconceptions about the necessity of using wool as the only material to keep ourselves warm. Or like when I talk about the exploitation of animals in surfaces, again, there's things like, they don't feel suffering, in some sense trying to gaslight the experience of animals and say that, oh, they perhaps are enjoying being exploited. So there's like a whole host of responses that I get. I presented 3 common responses in the earlier question, which is of intelligence, special relationship, and argument from might. But there's others that come up as well. Okay, I also have friends who have now acknowledged that what is happening is extremely unjust. Animals are being exploited in trillions, and there's many other animals in the wild that are suffering as well. And they need our help. They need our action to stop that suffering or to reduce that suffering. So once they acknowledge that, then the next question is, how do they align their actions to their attitudes? It is hard. I can acknowledge that, because yes, meat eating or a lot of these actions that we engage in which harm animals are so ingrained and integrated into our society and into our habits, where changing it can be of differing levels of difficulty for different kinds of people. For example, for someone who's already not consuming dairy in their lives, perhaps going vegan is an easier step. Whereas someone who's working in this industry, to go vegan and to give all of that up requires a lot more effort.
Like, I'm thinking of like, this is not a good analogy, but I'm thinking of like smoking. But here you're kind of destroying yourself. You're not killing somebody, you're killing yourself in some way. But the reason I like this analogy is because everybody generally does tell you smoking is bad, so you got to quit. But you have been smoking your whole life and you're not able to make that decision to kind of quit, even though you know it's bad for you. But here the only distinction is you're kind of killing yourself. But in the animal side, in the animal, when you're eating animals for your food pleasure, you're killing somebody else. So that's
That's a good point again. And again, these cognitive biases, whether sometimes when I'm trying to have a conversation, they use straw man. Like, I'm trying to make a point that animal interest is a moral consideration, but they perhaps attack something else, like Hitler was a vegetarian or something. So there's a lot of cognitive biases and fallacies that come up in these conversations, and it's not necessarily only for animals. It happens for all prejudices. If you're trying to talk to someone about patriarchy, if you're trying to talk to someone about casteism, if you're trying to talk to someone about the harms of capitalism, a lot of these cognitive biases influence the opinion that we hold, influence the kind of like rational thinking that should happen. So, like you rightly mentioned with the example of smoking tobacco, yes, there is enough evidence to show that it affects our health, and not just that, perhaps other such actions as well, apart from like not wearing a seatbelt or something like that. So, but people, because of, let's say, some underlying difficulties or due to these cognitive biases, or social pressures, like, oh, I won't wear a helmet because no one's wearing a helmet, like things like that. I won't follow the red light because no one's following the red light, so just me following it word to word. So to address that requires a better understanding of behavioral science. What can we do? Like adding small tax, let's say on tobacco, will perhaps do more than like trying to convince every individual person that tobacco is harmful. So making it costly to engage in harmful behaviors. So perhaps something like that could also be done for exploitation of animals. What I would advocate personally is for complete ban on all forms of, animal exploitation, is for animal testing, use of animals for fur, use of animals. But again, that requires changes in social processes as well.
Has that been done in any country before?
For example, fur has been banned, right, in many different countries. In India, cosmetic testing has been banned.
Okay.
Like using of animals for cosmetics, other such products. And so now there are alternative mechanisms in place which perform similar functions, like using AI or using, virtual models, perform similar things that don't require exploitation of animals. In fact, in a lot of these industries where animal exploitation happens, animal exploitation is not really necessary. The need is not there, which is, you don't need fur. Like, so why is it still happening? Because it's been so integrated into the economy of it that it's just self-perpetuating. Even though people recognize the vagueness and the unnecessariness of it, it's hard to change that process. And so it requires legal action, it requires policy changes, it requires legislative changes. I can give many such examples. For example, in the UK right now, like boiling of lobsters alive has been banned. Hunting of certain animals has been banned. So again, morals circle is different in different cultures as well. Like in India, we consider cows sacred. Like there's more importance given to cows. Whereas in China, if you go, like dogs are not considered. Like they're considered as a food animal as well. So they're also eaten in some parts of China. Whereas in India or in other parts of like the world, like say Western countries, like killing a dog and eating it would be considered hot.
Yes. Yeah.
Like cultural variations of speciesism as well. So yeah, there has been progress made, like a couple that I've already said, banning of fur, banning of animal experimentation in some of the...
Picks up on the mic. Yeah.
Yeah. So banning of animal experimentation for certain users has been banned. Yeah. So these are just some examples, but this I could go on and on. For example, alternative protein is one example, which is like trying to use technology to create an alternative where one doesn't need to depend on flesh derived from animals or products derived from animals for sustenance. So perhaps more investment and resources going in there could perhaps change. For example, if you go back, could change the need for humans to consume meat. So that's finishing on that point. But a historical analogy is like back in 1950s, people used to depend on horses for, going in
Transportation.
Yeah, transportation. But since the advent of mechanical automobiles, there has been, like, because that is more efficient, horses have slowly been,
No longer used
no
for
longer
transport.
used. So
But that's the thing, right? I mean, do you think that this is a tech problem? Like in the sense that, like, do you imagine a world where there are companies who can make synthetic chicken or synthetic, whatever, which taste like the best 1% chicken that organically can be killed, and you think that's the threshold where or because as I say it, I can also imagine like there are people who will never kind of buy that, no matter how tasty that is, because they know it's made in a kind of a lab, or because they know it's like not the quote unquote natural, like they will not kind of buy into that. So is tech the solution here, or what do you think?
tech is an opportunity. Tech has been a driver in some of these forms of harm being eliminated, like I mentioned, which was use of horses for automobiles, or alternative ways of getting information for, let's say, medical progress without using animals for experimentation. Tech has been an opportunity, but at the same time, tech has also been a cause of animal harms. For example, if you look at factory farms or things like artificial insemination, which has enabled factory farms to exist, there you can see that tech has been used to exploit animals on a larger scale in more healthy ways. So tech in itself is not, so it is a driver, but what matters is the intent and the values that people hold. So that is why I focus on targeting speciesism. Like if you focus on targeting racism or sexism, then tech can be used as a driver to enable a world that is less racist, less sexist. Similarly with speciesism as well. So using synthetic meat, whether it's plant-based meat, whether it is like, cellular meat, could be a viable solution if those values exist. If not, one could, I don't know, use tech for creating breeds of animals that give more meat as well, but causes more suffering. So it's very important to address both the value problem as well as using tech as a way to solve.
On the scale of factory farming, obviously we know it's a huge problem in the West, in the US. But is the scale similar in India as well? And is it as bad as in the US?
So, we are the second largest producer of beef in the world. We are also one of the largest producers of eggs, and in the world, I think, for the fourth largest producer of eggs. Chicken production, I think we are still in the top five as well. In terms of milk production, we're in the top two. So, yes, I think we are. While it's not as concentrated, you won't see factory farming at the same intensity as in some of the Western countries. But I think the concentration of factory farms is also increasing in India.
And the cruelty as well. Do you think it match? Again, I'm not too sure about the US cruelty as well. I know that some farms do. Again, but and do you have any thinking on that?
There's two things to be considered here. One is, should the exploitation exist in the first place? Should animals be used as means to an end in the first place? And the second is the amount of harm that they undergo in these institutions. I think your question is about the second one, which is the extent of harm in India. A lot of people have this conception of animals being reared in a very like a backyard home, hence being reared very freely, and cows roaming around the grasslands, and there being like a very mutually positive relationship, but that's not really the case. At the end of the day, the primary determinant for the person involved in rearing, farming, or exploiting of that animal is the profits that they get from it. If there is more profits involved in ignoring the interests of the animal or causing cruelty, say like artificial insemination, or say like rearing these hens in battery cages, which is more cruel. For example, India has not banned battery cages. A lot of companies still rear hens in these battery cages. It's extremely cruel. And for example, you will not find any regulation for farming fishes or shrimps in India, because they have never been considered. And so they are grown in these extremely crowded conditions where they lack oxygen and they're suffering a lot. And also it's no surprise for people in India that enforcement of any of these animal protection laws is extremely nimble, So you will have in principle a lot of these laws that, they should receive this space, etc. But at the end of the day, if you go look at any of the dairy farms, you would see them being tied with a very short chain, no space to move, and they sometimes sleep in their own, feces, etc. And sometimes the diseases that they have are not attended to, only insofar as these diseases affect the production of milk, etc. They are treated. Again, I'm not painting all the people in the same way, but these are the market forces operating, and this is what drives people to care profits over the well-being of the animal. In fact, government provides subsidies to encourage people to farm certain species of animals because it's useful for Indian economy or employment, etc. So again, there's incentives being put into place for animal exploitation.
So I think this is a good point in the sense we started this discussion about interest, right? And there are human interest and then there are animal interest. Can you walk me through your thinking on this, where let's say there are families, and I'm guessing there will be families who depend on, let's say, either killing of the chickens for the market, or I don't know, dairy production would be one of them. So there is an actual loss of probable income that is going to be lost due to, it's a necessary evil, is what I'm trying to say. Do you buy that argument?
I don't think so. I wouldn't really buy that argument, mainly because one would not buy that argument if it was done for human exploitation. So let's say child slavery or child trafficking. Let's say somebody is forced into a certain livelihood. We would say that is wrong because the action is affecting the children in a negative way. And irrespective of whatever benefit is accrued to the person involved in that particular livelihood, we would focus on the victims there. So that is one. And two is, as I mentioned, it's not like an individual decision per se. It's like the structures that enable people to view that as a viable livelihood. Where there is a market that buys the exploitation of animals. There is incentives put together by the government which provides discounts or infrastructure for people interested in animal rearing. Those are the two things, but at the same time, there are alternative livelihoods as well that people can go into if not for that. For example, let's consider the transition from people involved in manual, what do you call that,
Knitting.
treading mills, to like more like automated production of fabric, etc. So there definitely jobs were lost. Let's say, for example, typewriters before the advent of computers. People used to rely on that, but as computers became more and more sophisticated, people lost their jobs. So there's always going to be a transition from the jobs that are less valuable to jobs that are more valuable for the economy. So what matters here are the policy changes and the legislative changes that set the right incentives for people to choose a livelihood that is more ethical and that also sustains them. Right now, because speciesism exists in the society as a whole, there are more and more jobs involved in animal exploitation. One example at point is shrimp farming. There's a lot of shrimp farming that happens in Gujarat, even more so in Andhra Pradesh. There's a town called Bhimavaram where a lot of people are involved in rearing of aquatic animals and exploiting them. And so you would notice there that they do go through a lot of losses. So every time there's a small disease in one of these shrimps, the entire group of animals need to be killed. And it's a loss-making industry. But there's an opportunity there, which is, for example, seaweed farming can be a viable alternative. They can use the same pond to grow seaweed, and there is a market for seaweed. Seaweed is like a great primary product for a lot of things. Again, there needs to be a supply chain that needs to be created, which is again the job of the people who set the market mechanisms in place, whether it's the policymakers, the governance folks, or the legislators, etc. So what I'm trying to say here is that this is a structural problem, and I do recognize where the individuals are coming there from, which is they want livelihood. So they would choose anything that helps them in making money, which is also a problem of human poverty and lack of agency, where people, okay, if you give up exploiting animals for food, okay, what do you now do? You need to have more options for your livelihood and not depend only on that. So I think this is like a multifaceted issue and cannot just be brought down to, oh, a person requires livelihood, so it justifies them exploiting an animal.
I got very worried when you started talking about, this is an issue that has to be solved by policymakers, governance, and because I can barely get I can barely get to travel in a one way where there are no other vehicles coming on the opposite side. So I'm just trying to understand, how long do you think this fight will take? Where are we on the slavery? Slavery, I think, if we forget the Greek part and all that, I think at least if you look at modern US slavery, I think took about 400 years for it to kind of collapse. Where are we on that journey? How many more? Do you think this is a decades game? Do you think this is going to be a multi-century game? And where are we on that game?
Yeah, good question. I just want to clarify here that I don't think it's only a top-down approach to change the institution of animal exploitation. It's both a top-down and a bottom-up approach.
You're doing the bottom up, and
exactly. We need more like grassroots activists. We need more people on the ground to also try to change things, which creates an incentive for the people at the top to take heed of it and to create mechanisms to change that particular way things work. Again, this brings us into the topic of social change, social revolutions that happen. And it's a very messy affair, that it's not like a clear science of, oh, you do this and then this happens and this happens. It's a very chaotic. Entropy is very high in this. But we do know that there are certain levers that lead to positive changes within anything. For example, one could learn from social revolutions that happened in the past, whether it was the abolition of slavery movement, whether it was the anti-racism movement, and one could use that to kind of create informed guesses of what would it take to create something similar,
what moves people,
animals, etc. But then that said, there are different forces at play today compared to, let's say, 1940s, 50s, or whenever it was abolished. It could be that AI, for example, leads to things happening at a much faster rate. Perhaps AI could accelerate the development of alternative proteins. Perhaps AI could lead to acceleration of educating people that animal interests matter. Alternatives to animal experimentation, alternatives to use of animals in entertainment, say circuses, zoos, etc. So technology, like I said, could be a driver in progress in the way. But at the same time, as I mentioned, technology can also be used to entrench the existing system. Let's say right now you ask, how can I help the salmon? And the AI or the LLM doesn't think of salmon as a individual sentient being. It thinks of it as food. So it would only talk to you about how you can exploit the animal better. So we also need to understand, okay, how are different actors using technology to further their own interests? And given that, how can we bring about this social revolution? This is a very interesting question, and I think I can go on and on about it. But my personal feeling is that this could take anywhere between 100 to 200 years to bring about like a complete elimination of use of non-human animals.
AI involved, AGI factored
The
in.
question that we should be asking, AI will definitely be involved in whatever future of animals will hold. It's a force that cannot be ignored and will definitely have an influence on how the future goes. And I think it's very likely that it will be involved.
I think on that note, Aditya, thank you so much for taking the time. First of all, talking to me about again, I want to thank Nishit for introducing me to you. Thank you so much, and thank you for taking the time and talking to me about EA and also the part on the animal advocacy part. I hope people listening to this really resonate with what you're saying, and hopefully, inshallah, give up meat as well and be more considerate towards all the animals around you. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for including this important topic of discussion in your podcast. And I hope more people watch this and learn about all the topics that we discussed. And yeah, thanks for the great work you're doing.
Thank you.